everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. If you'd like to join us live, you'll find a schedule for upcoming sessions on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions posted to the Happiness Hour YouTube channel. My guests share their photography tips and insight into their creative journeys. They inspire us to try something new, and they encourage us to look at a subject a little differently. Tonight's guest is Beth Buelow. Beth's portfolio includes abstracts, ICM, nature, and small scenes that allow the viewer to take their time while moving slowly but purposefully within the frame. Beth strives to convey a sense of calm, order, mystery, and balance through her work. Take a peek at her website and you'll see that she accomplishes this in every one of her images. Beth's work has been recognized by ICM Photo Magazine, and her photos have received notable attention by a number of prestigious photography competitions, such as International Color Awards, Minimalist Photography Awards, and World Landscape Photographer, and that's just to name a few. In tonight's presentation, The Non-Literal Lens, Letting Go of Labels Through Abstract Photography. In her presentation, Beth will encourage you to explore and get started, or maybe expand your abstract photography practice by using both in-camera and post-processing techniques. She'll also talk about using abstraction exercises to re-energize how we see and relate to the world around us. If you're on Instagram, you can find Beth at Beth Buelow Photo, and you can connect with her through her website, linktree/Beth Buelow, and I will link those in the show notes below. With that, Beth, welcome back to the Happiness Hour.
I am so happy to be here. It's so wonderful. I just being able to hang out in the room for a few minutes ahead of time and seeing you connect with this awesome community. There's just so much good energy. So I'm super delighted to be here and so glad that you're all here. And I recognize many names and faces, and it's just good to see you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started here. Can you confirm for me that you see that opening slide?
I see it perfectly. It's
beautiful.
Just like magic. It's not like we
I know.
anything.
It's not like we planned that or just
all right.
Technology is awesome when it works. Yeah. Thank you. So thank you for setting everything up, Linda, so beautifully. And I want to acknowledge here at the start that one thing I have come to know about this community is that there are a lot of wildlife and nature photographers here. And what I'm going to be introducing to you or reinforcing or, exploring with you, it might seem like it's apart from that in some way or stretching away from that. I don't think I have a single bird picture in here, just a heads up. But I still encourage you, over time to think about what I'm going to be sharing here and how it can apply to what you already do, as well as use this as an opportunity to stretch into another genre of photography if you're not already doing it, and to do something that's like wildly different than what your happy place is, just as that way to stretch. So I just wanted to, plant that seed a little bit here in the beginning, so that as you were listening, you could be thinking about how can you transfer this to some of what you already know. So our roadmap for our time together, and I really had to pare this back, so I'm hoping that it's not going to be drinking from the fire hose. I want to hear from you a little bit and have just a brief sort of philosophical discussion about abstract. What is it and why is it important to us? I want to talk about the 4 levels or more of seeing and what the relationship that is to our photography, and particularly seeing things in an abstract way. Then I'm going to dive into more images and talk about some in-camera techniques and offer some examples of abstracts I've done, as well as I wanted to pull in some photography from some of the folks that I follow on Instagram. And I think a few of you are here in the room tonight. So I'm excited to share not just my own images, but some from the community as well. And then a few post-processing techniques and examples. All of my post-processing is in, well, I should say 99% of it probably is in Lightroom Classic. So if you're a Lightroom user, this will be a happy thing because I'm not going to show you anything that's like super advanced in Photoshop. There is a little bit of Photoshop stuff in there, but it's pretty, I hope, accessible. And then, as Linda said, offer some exercises to help you stretch the way you're seeing out in the world. Some very concrete, practical things that you can do to start to see things in a more abstract way. And then, of course, time for questions and comments. So first, the question is, why abstract photography? If this image is familiar, you might have attended that ICM presentation that I did back in February, because it so sums up one of the reasons why I think ICM as an abstract tool, as well as abstract photography itself, is so important. And what you're seeing here, this is a group of us that were at a photography workshop in Chicago, and we were at the Contemporary Art Museum. And if you've been there, you might recognize exactly where we are. You probably know exactly what we're pointing our camera to, which is this wonderful staircase that's sort of in a football shape. And you see everybody's back, everybody's pointing their cameras in the same direction. They've all got, relatively same focal lengths, that sort of thing. And so the outcome is going to be likely some overlap, right, in what they're capturing. And so one of the reasons that abstract photography, I think, is so, it's almost, I think of it as kind of job security, because you're creating things that no one else is going to create. It's inevitably going to be your unique vision. Nobody else is, you could have 10 photographers standing on a particular hillside and going out into the scenery, and there's probably a lot of variation, but there's kind of only so much variation that you're going to be able to do. But if you take a representational, literal approach, but if you've got abstract in your back pocket, then you're going to create something that nobody else is able to create. And that, to me, is one of the magical things about it, and what's most fun about it. I would love for you to share in the chat, if you would, your thoughts on these three questions. First, how do you define abstract photography? In your own words, what is abstract photography? Along with that, what's the value of it? And then give us a sense of how often do you create abstract images? And to make it simple, frequently, occasionally, seldom, or never. It would be helpful for me to know a little bit about who's in the room and what your experience and frequency is with abstract. But I'm just curious to hear different opinions about, how do you define abstract photography? And I'm just going to be silent for just a moment and hope that the chat starts populating a little bit with your thoughts.
I can catch those for you, Beth.
Thank you.
Jude is saying abstract photography is non-representational imagery.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Jude. And Jude, how often do you engage in abstract?
I mostly do landscape, but I do like to look at things differently or deeper and try to make abstractions.
Great.
So Catherine is saying it's her, where'd it go? Oops, sorry, it flew up. My own view of the world, rarely literal. Somebody on the iPad is saying abstract is a type of art that depicts the subject simply as is. ICM is an example of. Mm-hmm. Karina, you always
I love that.
I created an abstract photo once on accident and I loved it. I like Donna's explanation. It's a twist on reality. So yeah, there's a lot of takes on this.
Yeah.
Debbie says, I define abstract photography as photography that is not literal and can have a different interpretation, different viewers. It's true. Bridget says it's images of shapes and forms that does not portray the subject in realistic ways. Christian's kind of following that. Shape, color, line that does not represent something specific. Oh, Catherine, I like this. It frees the soul. Yeah. So we're getting a bunch of them in here. I'm going to kind of skip through, so I don't want to. Joan says abstract photography to me is something where you can tell what the subject is.
And I'm wondering if it's like what it is. Oh, you can't tell what it is.
You can't tell what it is. Right. I was like, wait a minute. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I like this one. I think it's Val McKinley. It's experimental, playful, and reveals a unique view of reality. So yeah.
Great.
There's in there. Yeah. Thank you for participating.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. It looks like we've got some frequent abstractors. And so, I don't pretend that anything that I say is going to be news to you. My hope is that this is something that might inspire you to try something different or remind you of something that you already knew that maybe you'd forgotten. Or reinforces like, I'm really, I'm jamming on this abstract thing. So I really appreciate that even those of you that do this frequently and maybe have even more experience than I do, are here in the spirit of learning and we can all learn from each other. So I want to share my favorite definition so far. And when I put together this presentation, my first intention was to do this like very brief history of abstract art. Haha, right? Like, how can you do that very briefly? Because I did not get an art history degree. But I do feel like sometimes we need to know whose shoulders are we standing on, who paved the way for what we are able to do now. Because of course, just like with any new art form, abstract photography and abstract art was not immediately something that people were excited about. So it's good to kind of do a retrospective and see, but I decided to cut most of that. But in the process of doing my research, I did find this wonderful definition from Alvin Langdon Coburn that he said in 1916. I suggest that an exhibition be organized of, quote, abstract photography, in that in the entry form, it should distinctly be stated that no work will be admitted in which the interest of the subject matter is greater than the appreciation of the extraordinary. And I just read that and I was like, wow, that is so cool. That kind of sums it up for me, where it's like the question of what is it that you're photographing? That's not the important thing. And if you're asking that, then, I don't want to say something fails as an abstract, but it's something is failing in the vision of the viewer in terms of their imagination to be able to let go. And so I think, good abstract will push so that it truly is something that is more about that appreciation of the extraordinary, that's what it inspires. He went on in this particular piece of writing to say, why should not the camera throw off the shackles of contemporary representations? You get this image of, breaking free. Why, I ask you earnestly, need we go on making commonplace little exposures that may be sorted into groups of landscapes, portraits, and figure studies? So you can tell that he sounds like he's got maybe a little bit of disdain, but I'm guessing, he was in his early 30s and probably that even evolved over time. Why should not perspective be studied from angles hitherto neglected or unobserved? Think of the joy of doing something which it would be impossible to classify or to tell which was the top and which the bottom. And so I share that because I love the sort of abandon and the freedom that his observations about what abstract can be, what that gives us. And so it's in that spirit that we're moving forward with this discussion. Like I said, I want to talk for a few minutes just about these levels of seeing. And because we have experienced talented photographers in this room, I would love to hear from you, especially if I'm missing anything. I'm a professional coach as well as a photographer. So I do leadership and life coaching. And in coaching, we talk about different levels of listening. And we talk about level 1, 2, and 3. So level 1 is just like the surface, you hear my words. Level 2 is that you start to hear sort of in between the words. You pick up a little bit of the energy. And level 3 is what we call multidimensional perceiving, which is you're able to take in more of the environment around it, and everything is informing the actual words maybe that are hitting your eardrum, but you're able to kind of synthesize and have some context around what you're hearing, and it enriches and deepens the way you're hearing things. And it occurred to me one day, seeing is the same thing. And this is part of the key to seeing in an abstract way. And so as I'm going through these, I personally identified 4. I'm sure I'm not the first person to think of this, and I won't be the last. But if you've got thoughts as I'm sharing this, please feel free to share in the chat, especially if I'm missing anything. But I see that first level is that we are seeing things objectively. We're seeing things with a label. It's very representational and very practical. And it's meant to communicate what is and or its purpose. So, this cup is a cup and its function is to hold liquid. It's very objective and factual. And then we move on to another level of seeing, which is more about the aesthetics of it. We see beyond the functionality of the piece, and we're looking at its worthiness or its beauty or craftsmanship. We're appreciating it on a different level. But we're likely still kind of seeing it as the function of what it is supposed to serve. And then we have another level of seeing that I think is more emotional. So we're noticing what emotions or memories or narratives are evoked from that object or from whatever it is or that scene that we're looking at. So it's less about seeing the mountains and more of a feeling of grandeur or aspiration. And then finally, and this is where we get to the seeing abstractly, is the subjective seeing. So if we're seeing subjectively, we're seeing without those labels. We're allowing the context somewhat to melt away. We're more using our imagination and focusing on more elements like texture and color and lines. And we have that multidimensional perceiving. Like instead of it being sort of a flat functional thing, we're seeing more of a prism of possibilities. And in this case, and this was one of the most important things that I learned a couple years ago from a mentor, like the subject is not the same as the object being photographed. I had photographed like this really close up of a red bell pepper that had a green leaf across it. And he asked me, he said, "What's the subject of this photo?" And I said, "Well, it's a pepper." And he said, "No, the subject is actually the color. It's the red that really draws you in and is what gives you some of that emotion and energy." And so that subject isn't the pepper, it's the emotion that's evoked, or it's the elemental focus that's been, that the intention was there for. Linda, you'll let me know if anything comes up in the chat that feels like it's something to chime in with, right?
I will.
Okay, cool. So those are, I invite you to think about that in your own seeing. And as you're observing the world, just kind of moving around, on what level are you seeing things? And can you take a moment, and this is something of an exercise that I offer later, but, can you take something that you usually only see on that objective level, and can you take it through until you see it subjectively and see what that journey is like in your perception? So now I want to talk about how we put these levels of seeing into practice. And here we get into the fun stuff because we're going to get into some images. I'm a big fan of doing as much as possible in camera, whether that's multiple exposures or ICM and blur, whatever I can do in camera, the better for me anyway. And so that's mostly what I'm going to be sharing here. As we get into this fun stuff, and it's sort of a, but wait, there's more. Before I share the images, I just wanted to share a few kind of mindset things. And this is going to also apply towards, or I'm sorry, this is going to sound familiar if you were at my ICM presentation before, or if you've watched it. So first is to just make friends with manual mode. You want to have as much complete freedom as you can. You want to be able to change things on the fly and experiment. So just really getting comfortable with manual mode, I think, is kind of essential to being able to really stretch yourself in this abstract way. Releasing labels, being able to move from that objective to subjective viewing, and letting go of seeing things in the box that we have put them in, how we have identified them. Holding the rules lightly. We can think of, and this is something I shared in the ICM presentation as well, that, some people will say there are no rules, and you can look at abstract and think there are no rules. It's kind of an anything goes situation, the wild, wild west. And my perception, it's kind of a yes and. Yes, there is a high degree of freedom. And some of those rules, and I'd rather think of them as guidelines or guardrails or best practices, things that we have sort of collectively, either explicitly or implicitly, kind of agreed on some level are pleasing aesthetically, or that contribute to story or emotion. And you can think of that as anything from doing border patrol on your image, to looking at hotspots and making sure there's nothing distracting there, to even rule of thirds and things like that. So we have those as a sort of a reference point. They're data points. And even in representational photography, we want to hold them lightly, I think. But especially in abstract, we want to be able to, again, like just use it as a data point to say, okay, does that work here? If it doesn't work, what will work? And the main thing is to use those guardrails or those guidelines only as much as they serve the image to make it more of what you want to communicate. I hope I'm articulating that well. You consider them in as much as it makes it easier for you to communicate your vision to someone. So to hold them lightly, just to kind of keep them in the back of the mind, but not seriously. And then keep asking what if, and make sure that you're playing. I used to actively avoid the word saying, I'm playing with this, because there was something about it that felt unserious. And so I'm experimenting with this. And I still think experimenting is really important, but I've come to kind of embrace that word play, because it really does set you free, and it puts you more in that kind of discovery mode. Prepare to take lots of bad photos. This was something that we talked about in the ICM as well. There's going to be a lot of photos where you're going to think, that cannot see the light of day. And out of those 100 photos that might be like that, you're going to come up with one or two. And I think I know that as I have grown as a photographer, I have way more bad photos than I used to. And that's just because I have a different level of understanding of my vision, what I want to communicate, what my own standards are. And so I kind of am excited when I see a lot of bad photos. So I'm like, okay, those are photos that maybe even a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have looked at and said, oh, that's pretty good. And so if I'm growing, I'm being a little bit more discerning. I'm not being hard on myself. I'm not beating myself up and being harsh, but I am looking at it through a more mature, critical lens. And so be prepared for a lot of them to be like, oh, this is just not good, but you power through because you know it's going to be worth it to get ones that you really like. Prepare for people not to understand or even like your photos. That's true no matter what, right? But it's even more true in abstract, because you'll get people saying, like, I don't get it, or what is the subject, and trying to make sense of it. And there might be something else there that you're trying to communicate that they might not be, that there might just be a disconnect. They might not like it, or they might not get it. But, it's just be prepared for that kind of reception, I guess. And then embracing a beginner's mind approach. And that's really the bottom line that kind of sums up everything else that I've shared up in this list. To remember the things that you know, but don't let what you know get in the way. So don't let what you know, don't let the curse of knowledge get in the way of experimenting, stretching, playing, asking what if. Don't let it self-sabotage you. So, images, woohoo! My favorite, my recent obsession, I guess, is with multiple exposures in camera. I shoot on a Canon R5, and so it has 4 multiple exposure modes: additive, average, dark, and bright. And I have to admit, between the dark and the bright, I'm still learning, what effect happens with each one. I do a lot of switching around and experimenting until I get the look that I want. So I'm paying less attention to how did I get it, and more to, like, what was the outcome. Maybe some of you can identify with that. At least I hope so. But, this image, this little series of images, I'm wondering if anybody could share in the chat if there's any guesses on what the object is that was being photographed here.
Okay.
Ariel knows, so she'll be quiet. Yeah, I was going to say, some of you are going to know some of the things that I'm going to be asking you. Barbara says paper. Sorry, Linda.
No, that's fine. Cynthia's got a question, though.
Yeah.
Do you remember which mode you used in camera? Dark, additive, etc.
I don't always know.
That's fair.
I honestly, many of you probably follow Sarah Marino. And I remember years ago at an out of Chicago conference, she made the disclaimer right off the bat. She said, I am not a techie. I am much more interested in the creativity and the artist process. And something about her saying that, like, set me free from getting really, like, geeky out on the tech. And in some cases that includes, how did I do that? I'm not necessarily saying that that's a great practice, because I kind of do want to, it's inefficient sometimes to not have your go-to, like, I know what's going to happen when I do this, or this. But for me, as long as I'm experimenting and practicing and playing, it's more about, like, experimenting with the recreating. Yeah, I only ask so I can recreate something. Yeah, I try to pay attention, but if somebody has got a good way of tracking that, I would love for them to share.
Okay, I see 2 guesses. One was paper, the other one was Tupperware. That was from Jude.
Good. Yep.
It could be Judy. I'm not sure, but I'm going to say, okay.
Okay, so
just tell me,
it's closer to the Tupperware. Closer to the Tupperware. It's a slow feeder dog bowl.
What?
Right? So I ordered this. It came in the mail. I opened up the package. I put it on the kitchen counter. I'm like, cool. And I just took it downstairs to the basement and I set it down and I just started playing. And that I came up with what I think they're cool, like, sort of abstract flower or rose kinds of looking. And you can tell I played with it in some post-processing with the color, because all of them are of this orange dog bowl. Mm-hmm. And part of my point of sharing this is, Barbara, you never know when inspiration is going to strike. One of the reasons I share this is because that's one of the fun things about abstract, is that ordinary objects take on new functionality. They have new ways of inspiring you. So the next one I'm going to share, these are a series again, and these were like winter projects when going outside here in Michigan wasn't very much fun. But this is basically the result, of going to the craft store and getting what you see there are like little wooden tiles, I guess, like little wooden cutouts of different sizes. So I bought like a container, I think it was like $4. And then I bought some of circles as well, and scrapbook paper. And so I just would lay out the blocks on the black, take an exposure of that, move over, take an exposure of the scrapbook paper. I'm sure I went back and forth, like, what mode should I be in to get the effect that I want? And I can't remember what it was on these. But this is kind of what I'm talking about with play. Now, are these, portfolio competition images? No, but they're fun, and they got me to stretch and use my creativity in a new way that helped me to learn more about how I wanted to do multiple exposures. This is just a very simple red ribbon on a light pad. And again, just like with the dog bowl, I love the very sort of contemporary, it looks like a contemporary rose or flower to me. And so it's just 2 exposures. I think I don't even think I moved the ribbon. I think I just moved the camera around to take these. And I love them. Any guess, and some of you are going to know what this is. Any guess, this is not made in my basement, but any guesses on what you're seeing here? And I'll say I think this is like 5 exposures. Okay, paper bag. Boy, a paper bag would have been cheaper than it took to get this. Aha, Michelle, dunes. Yep, and Barbara. Yep, this is the Ibex dunes in Death Valley National Park. And I have to admit, and one of the other workshop participants, I saw him, he's like, I think I asked what he was doing, and he said, oh, I'm doing some multiple exposures. And I'm like, oh, perfect, and so I turned around and saw this and started doing it. And I love this. I think I called it Fractured Ibex, and there's a series of them. And it's just a way to take something. That's one of those things. You had 10 of us standing on a dune crest, and how many of us got this particular image? And I'm certain they got images, if they were looking at abstractly, that I didn't get. So that's what I think is kind of fun about it. And a paper bag would have been way cheaper. I'm going to have to remember that. Here's one, and Pamela is here.
She is here.
Pamela Sherlock, yeah. She is in rural Minnesota, and actually, I'm just going to go ahead and reveal. Whoops, I went too far. Reveal this. Actually, Pamela, since you're here, would you say just a word about this image? If you're willing.
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was a week back from spending 2 weeks in Scotland, where the fall colors were intense, and I got home and it was not the same, and it was kind of meh, but I still have that urge to create daily. And part of my practice is multiple exposure photography. And I thank you for sharing this. I was so happy to be there on that day. And it was very fulfilling to be able to create when you can create anywhere, especially with abstract photography, even if the weather isn't perfect or the light isn't perfect. It's better if their light is perfect, but whatever. But anyway, thanks. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot and share a little bit about that, because I love this image, and what I love your backstory just as much, because you talked about, you were in Scotland, and everywhere you looked there were, beautiful scenes, and it's probably like the more obvious photographic subjects. And then we get back home, and especially after we've been someplace like that, sometimes they'd be like, bleh, what do I make of this? And I love that you turn to this more abstract interpretation of your surroundings to bring some energy to what might have seemed like an unremarkable scene. You have made it remarkable through this abstraction. So thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for letting me share it here. Some of you might have seen these on my Instagram feed. I had the fortune of having the good fortune of a 3-hour layover in O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. And that's hard to say unless you're a photographer and you've got time to head to Concourse C in Terminal 1, which is the United terminal. And this is a stretch between the concourses. And so you can see here in this lower right corner, basically the scene. And if you've been in this airport, you'll recognize this. And it's that particular section of the concourse that I used to create the 3 images that you see above. I think these are dark mode, but I'm not 100% sure. And I think they were probably 5 exposures, just for each of them, 5 exposures focused on this portion of the airport. And I spent probably about an hour in that concourse, just kind of moving around. Sometimes I would ride the moving sidewalk and, take photos as I was going. And it's so cute because people in Chicago are so polite, Midwesterners. And some people would like stop walking so that I could take my photo and stuff. And I'm like, you're okay, keep going. So people are very kind, but I spent about an hour, and the images I'm going to show you, I've got a couple more slides of these. I probably took in the last 15 minutes of being there. So it took a while to kind of warm up to stretching beyond seeing objectively to seeing more subjectively, and kind of loosening up how I was seeing the scene, so that I could get more creative. This is another series, same concourse. I believe these were 5 exposures each as well. And I was like turning the camera in different directions and trying to leverage. I mean, Pamela mentioned good light or bad light. The white light of some of the panels could be distracting, but then I started to realize, it's kind of making this 3-dimensional feel to it. So why not keep playing with that and leverage it? And I'm going to show you how I made this particular image. You can see here's the 5 exposures. So I started with a broader view, zoomed in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, until I got to, this is the raw photo. You can see it's very bright and overexposed and whatnot. Pulled it into Lightroom. You can see I processed it, pretty heavily, because I wanted to go for a more kind of pop art, I guess, more saturated, extreme abstract. So boosting clarity and texture and probably some dehaze and contrast and whatnot. And I found this little corner scene that I really liked of these lines right here, especially with the reflection in the shiny floor. And then it ended up being this image, which I just love it as an abstract. There's something about it that makes me happy. And you can see I even abstracted it even further by flipping it so that the floor is at the top and the rest of it's at the bottom. And then this one's sort of the most wild one of them all, but I really loved. For some reason, it just made me really happy that C32 was like right there. So I thought that gives it the name. It gives it a little bit of context without telling you exactly what it is. But I love that this just kind of looks like a little house of mirrors. If you didn't know the concourse, you'd be like, what am I looking at? And so there's a little bit of that literal there that you're probably looking at some sort of space that you can occupy. But you have no idea like what the room is, most likely, or how you would relate to that room. So that's what brings up that abstract quality to me. And I think, Linda, in your intro, you said something about, I like to make calm, organized images.
Wow. Thanks for throwing me under the bus.
Yeah. Well, I sort of threw myself under the bus. Yeah, I threw myself under the bus because that's the other thing that I invite you to think about, and that I've really artistically been sort of in friction with myself of, what's my aesthetic? What is my way of seeing what, and can you look at an image and say, oh, that looks like something Beth photographed, because there are certain people, like you see a Sarah Marino and it's Sarah Marino. You might see an Alex Noriega or TJ Thorne or, any number of other folks. And there's some quality about it. And often that comes from some consistency and not conformity, but just consistency across in some sort of energetic thread. And I kind of like to contradict myself. So I invite you to do the same, that's part of the play. We're not all one thing or the other. And so to be able to explore both of those is, I think, really important to developing ourselves as artists. And then that was all just multiple exposure. So another in-camera technique, of course, is intentional camera movement. And I know a lot of you are kind of versed in this technique, and I do refer you to the last happiness hour that I did back in February, if you want more information about that, or the Out of Chicago takeover, as well as there are numerous wonderful ICM photographers, particularly follow Stephanie Johnson. She leads the ICM Photo Magazine Network, and you'll get lots of exposure to some really great ICM. But of course, ICM, we're talking about slow shutter speed, a smaller aperture to compensate for the amount of light coming in, no tripod, yay, because I'm allergic to tripods, and really a playful spirit. And so looking at these, some of you probably maybe know what these are, but I'm just going to go ahead and reveal. This is another one of these. Did it in my basement with a piece of paper. So somebody else before said paper, what I used, that was sort of foreshadowing this particular piece. All I did was take some different colored construction paper, cut it into narrow strips, used a quill thing to wrap them up tightly and uniformly, put them on the light pad, and then I just moved around, and played with different motions. And so what you see here in the processing, there's no extra effects. It's just, adjusting sliders to get these different effects. And I called this particular series water music because there was something aquatic about it. Like sometimes it felt like you were maybe looking down at really clear water and how it might break into sort of prisms. That's what it reminded me of. So that's what I went with. And those are single exposure ICMs. And these are also single exposure ICMs. This is just simply Slinky and scrapbook paper. So I just put the scrapbook paper on the light pad, put the Slinky in different, sometimes I'd stretch it out a little bit. Sometimes I would just let it, do its Slinky thing. Or I would wrap it like you see here, like a donut. And then I would just experiment with different motions, and it blurs the scrapbook paper and made these really wonderful sort of rainbow effects that I think are really compelling and that abstract it even more. And then, for some more ICM, this is just kind of a little hodgepodge of different interpretations of scenes in nature. So before we were down in my basement, now we're out the front door and in different places. And again, like thinking about there's opportunities everywhere. Like I love this autumn tree. This was in a field off of a parking lot of some big box store that I just happened to see. So I pulled over and got out and spent some time trying to capture something. This is just autumn leaves. That one is a multiple exposure. And this, this birch one is a multiple exposure. Otherwise, these are just single exposures. These, of course, are dunes, calla lily. I took this photo on my kitchen table. The calla lily was in a pot. I think I might have put a piece of paper behind it to kind of isolate it. And then I just started doing this. And this is one image that's gotten recognized in a couple of different competitions. And so I always sort of smile to myself because it's like, it was so simple, relatively simple to do. It did not take anything fancy, but it has some sort of impact. And then this, Lisa, you're saying, and Debbie, you were asking about the tree. And yeah, I think this one's interesting. I think what I did was I just did a quick little, like a little sort of semicircle motion. And what's interesting is that this is one frame that was meant to be part of a multiple exposure. So there was another frame after this, and then they were combined in camera. I didn't like the combined image, but I loved this one as a standalone. So I share that because as you're looking at these multiple exposures, sometimes my tendency is to just skip ahead to whatever the composite is and kind of ignore the setup images. But now I'm trying to make a habit of like always taking a look at the setup images because sometimes those have value standing alone. So I hope that helps with the that tree image. And then this, I couldn't bring myself to call it out of focus, so I'm calling it loose focus, where you've got your aperture. You open up your aperture fairly wide because that gives you really good bokeh, but you play with the focus until you get that. I don't know how many of you wear glasses or contacts, but you get that feeling like you're looking at the world without your glasses. That's this image right here down in the lower left corner with the trees. I was standing on the porch of the cabin and looking out at the water through the sunset. And without my glasses on, this is exactly what it looks like. And so I just, made my aperture as open as I could, played with the focus until I got the bokeh that I wanted and hit the shutter. And I just love that effect. And then we are in the best time of year for abstract in some ways because we've got lights and all sorts of sparkly things and decorations and all sorts of objects that we can play with. And this is it's just a silver, glitter star that I bought at the grocery store and just put it on, some black, as dark a background as I could find. I actually made these in a hotel room because I was traveling at the time and I was doing a photo challenge with a friend. And so I didn't have much in the way of setup. So I think I was just like finding the darkest and flattest and least reflective surface I could. And I did, I believe, 3 exposures for each of these. One I just took of the star itself. Then I threw it out a little bit of focus, and then I threw it out more in focus to get more of that sort of bokeh effect. And Laura, thank you. Laura says, I'm obsessed with these starburst images. I had way more fun than anyone has a right to. And I still have this ornament, and I think I'm going to go back and play with it some more. So I invite you to try that loose focus to see how that might transform things around you. And then removing context. I know some of you know what this is because I shared the reveal on Instagram. But anyway, who knows? Go ahead and put it in the chat because I know somebody knows. I know Ariel knows what the object was that was part of this these images. It is a plant. Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. Yeah. What kind of specific plant? A palm. That's a good guess. That would be a good idea. It's close to a palm. It's an edible palm in a way. I'll just go ahead. So it's a leek, right? So this is just a single exposure ICM leek. And what I love about it is that it looks architectural. Like it looks like you're close up in a corner of a building or something like that, or some sort of light shaft or staircase. So another thing where it's like, it was right there in our vegetable delivery. So, you just don't know where you're going to find these kinds of things. Out of context, this is Angie McMonigal, which if you don't already follow her, I highly encourage you. She's a brilliant abstract architecture photographer. She does straight architecture to pay the bills, and then also adds on the architecture, which I think she also has for sale and does a nice print business. So I love that she posted this on Thanksgiving. And so you can see why, because it sort of has this turkey feather kind of feeling about it. I have no idea where she is. I don't know how big or small this is, like no context. but it's just beautiful in its composition.
Beth,
All right,
let me
yeah.
interrupt. Before you go too far, we're just slow typists in here. On the leak photo,
Yeah.
Cynthia wants to know, can you tell us what lens you're shooting with?
I probably was using my Lens Baby Velvet 56
Okay.
because that's one of my go-tos.
And then Anne wants to know, wasn't that one of the ones that you took over 100 photos of?
Oh, it might have been. I don't know.
Okay. All right. I didn't want to like let the questions pass, but okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, that's awesome. No, thank you. And so this is Robert Hecht, who I don't know if he's here tonight, but I think some of you follow him, and he's a fine art photographer based in Portland. Again, no context to this. What would you guess it is? Just quick in the chat. What are you looking at? Torn paper, Christian. Yeah, thank you. Any other guesses? Let's see. Staples, rust. Staples on torn off posters. Tree bark. Yeah, awesome. All right, I'm wondering if Anne knows because she nailed it there. So what Robert has taken here is, what did he say? Many telephone poles in Portland bear the visual history of posters, years of posters come and gone. They can at times resemble ready-made collages, and I love finding such bits of organization within the seeming chaos. And I love this because it just opens up your imagination, rust, tree bark, paper, all sorts of things. And it's, or even like, it could be something more organic and in terms of like something from an animal, or even, flying up. Could be a drone shot of something, who knows? So I just love that. One more, Maria Ruggieri, who I had the pleasure of meeting back in September. She's a photographer in the Seattle area. What do you see in this one? I'm curious if you could do some quick chatting about it. What do you see? Or what do you think it is? What's it evoke for you? Ariel, paint on a wall. Paint on canvas or wall. Yep, Pamela, she does do great work. Water and clouds, paint on a boat. And again, and you must follow. Because that's it. Paint on a metal object. Reminds me of the sky and the ocean. Yeah, great. No, Anne, you're so good. I love it. Yeah, she says, an unfinished job on a boat flank made me think of a child's painting of dawn on the sea. And so I thought, wow, that, so well seen. Because once you see that, you hear her interpretation of that, it's like, oh, wow, yeah. And wow, she saw that on a boat flank, right? Anne says, I spend too much time on Instagram. That's awesome. So do I. We probably all do. Another in-camera technique, zoom in, zoom out. So get closer and back away. So, here on the left, we've got, all of these were taken in Chicago. So on the left is the Lincoln Park Pavilion, just close up. To the right of that, a very sort of similar shot is columns at Union Station, and then two skyscrapers that are reflecting one another. And part of what I appreciate about this particular image is the negative space, to be paying attention to how that also informs the image, especially when you're doing that zooming in and out. And then, of course, you might recognize I think they call them the corn cobs, Marina Towers, and an abstract of those. This is a zooming in. These happen to be peonies. A bouquet that I think I got at a farmer's market. And I just love how it looks like maybe satin, like a satin skirt that's been sort of bunched up a little bit, or might be, you can almost imagine it moving. So that's, again, removing that context and zooming in gives you a different perspective. And then element focus, shadows, depth, form, lines. I threw in some Texas shots here for you all. So if you're in the Houston area, you might recognize some of these buildings. The one on the left, and then the spiral, and then the one on the right. Those are all in downtown Houston. The other ones are in Chicago. And so you can tell, with each of these, I'm focusing on either the lines and the interesting sort of patterns that they make, or the kind of warped perception of it, giving you some feeling of depth or looking at shadows. So those are more the subject of these than the object itself. And then more elements, reflections, texture, color. 3 of these, except the bricks, are here in Muskegon. The other 3 are in downtown Chicago. Those are other things, you could just walk around and just say, I'm just going to focus on reflections. And you're going to get some really amazing things, especially if you're in a larger city. So that's another approach to it. Also in camera, special lenses and filters, obviously. These are some that I shared on Instagram that where I took with the Lensbaby Spark 2.0. So, the accordion lens that I consider like the most challenging lens of my Lensbabies, with a Sweet 50. And basically a lot of the times I'm just moving the accordion around. And that's creating some of these sort of skewed effects, and just a lot of fun. And so these are all Christmas lights, these first 3. And then the last one was taken at Chicago Botanic Garden. Another one, Lynn Hughes, someone I follow on Instagram. And if you, and I'm going to put handles, the Instagram information for all the folks that I've shared here in the chat once we're complete. But these are wonderful. This is a wonderful series that she's done. She calls Evanescence. And they're all images that are taken with the flowers under ice. They're frozen, either partially or completely, or she's thawed and refrozen them. And it just creates this beautiful in-camera texture and abstraction to these flowers that I think is really beautiful. And yes, Pamela, the accordion is like a tilt shift. It's similar to like the effect you get with the Soul 45 that you can kind of move around, but way less expensive than a tilt shift, right? And probably less precise. And then there's post-processing. Like I said, all in Lightroom. So here we've got an unedited raw ICM grass done at a conservatory in Indianapolis. And just by changing the color, changing the orientation and the cropping, I get this sort of series of these really, just kind of background pleasing abstracts that you would never guess are grass, but that can serve different purposes, whether that's your Zoom background or something for a PowerPoint. And they're just fun to play around with. Multiple exposure, in camera, dark, 1 still and 2 ICM. So here you see the unedited raw. I'm pretty sure I used dark mode for this. Processed it in color. I was like, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. But okay, I'll try it in black and white. A little bit more interesting. But then when I moved it towards this cool tones, I was like, there we go. That's what it is. And that image I took in mid-August, I think. And somebody was like, that looks like a winter shot, like I look cold. And so that's part of the abstraction for me. It's like you're taking it out of context. You're creating something that is not literal, that was not experienced in real time, but still can be interesting. And then some architecture ones. This is 8 Spruce in New York City. The unedited raw, process and cropped. So really going in and manipulating it around, and then that final process and crop. So really playing a lot with how you're orienting something and the processing that you're doing. Another of 8 Spruce, a much more literal image of it, the unedited raw. Then it's processed and cropped. I played around with it with this vertical orientation because I tend to have a vertical bias, but then I finally landed on the horizontal. And you can see how much that really crops it out. And I think I called this one Urban Undulations. So architecture is a ton of fun to use in your abstract. Here's another slinky one. In the post-processing for this, Here's the first and second images that you see up here. You can tell I went into Lightroom and did all of the, general cleanup of the image and tried to make it the contrast higher. Then I took it into Photoshop and inverted them, which added to the abstraction. So remember things like inversions as a way to add abstraction to your images. I'm going to ask forgiveness rather than permission on these because I didn't have a chance to reach out to Jean Garrett to ask if I could share these, but I'm hoping she wouldn't mind. She is in part of Photo Midwest, and she's a Midwest based photographer, and she does a lot of multimedia kinds of stuff. She doesn't say she's a photographer, she says she's a visual artist. And each of these images you're seeing has some sort of collage added to it, and it's hand stitching or gold leafing. She has a theme of adding a circle of some kind to her images. So I just thought this was a really beautiful example of how you can take your photography and use it as a base to create something else. And another photographer I encourage you to follow is Mike DeMiola, and he's in Vermont. And what I liked about one of his posts here was that it's a combination. He's presenting sort of a series collage of abstract alongside the more literal, and I think it really pairs well. It gives it I don't know, it just gives it a much more well-rounded feeling to the visual story that he's trying to tell here. And so abstract practice, I'm going to go through these really quickly because it's called Happiness Hour, and I realize we're at an hour. But if Linda and you all would grant me just a few more minutes.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. So ways to stretch. And some of you might know this particular exercise because I borrowed it from, I can't remember where I first encountered it, but called 20 images, or at least I'm calling it 20 images, where you take a very ordinary object and you challenge yourself to just, put it in a very plain sort of setting. Here, I was just putting it on the dining room table, this container of Scotch tape, and take just 20 images of it. And every one of those 20 have to be different. And so for me, it forced me to slow down. It made me think about, like, how was I relating to this object as I moved through it? And you can see, and I think this is roughly probably in the order I took the photos. So you can see this very first image is very literal, like it's a tape dispenser. And then it starts to move a little bit more into that abstract till you get things like that, or like this last one, where it's like, I don't know what that is, And so again, this is like this way to stretch. And I've done this with a coffee mug, which is kind of hard to get 20 out of a coffee mug, but you can do it. The tape dispenser, an iPhone stand, a doll, I could see myself maybe even doing it with like my AirPod case because it's got, different dimensions. You want to make it challenging, but not too challenging in terms of like find an object that has some dimension to it. But it's such a fun experiment to help stretch how you're seeing and to notice how you're shifting your relationship to whatever that object is. Time and 5, I made up the name for this, but I'm grateful to TJ Thorne for passing along this exercise and challenge to me. His challenge, and he was echoing someone else's, where he said he would put himself in a small room, like a bathroom, for an hour, no camera, nothing, and just observe for that time. And then get your camera. And the goal is to take abstract images for, however long, 30 minutes, an hour if you need to, and come away with 5 that you really appreciate. Again, you're not going for portfolio worthy images here or even website worthy. They're more about this creative expansion and exercise. And so these are ones that I took. I did a sort of mini solo retreat and did an Airbnb cabin up in northern Michigan. And I only lasted 20 minutes of just observing. So I set my, my timer for 20 minutes. And I didn't touch my camera. I just sat and I just looked. And I got up occasionally, but I really studied it. And then I got my camera and I set the timer for 20 minutes and took photos. And I really kind of actually like this little series that I created. I think for some reason, this first one of the cigarette sign, the no smoking sign, kind of pleases me a lot because it was abstract. You know, it's abstracted to start with that way, but when you turn it, kind of looks like to me like a smokestack, you know, with steam coming out of it. So it's a way of reminding you to play again and to see things in a different way. And I like this last one because it looks like a face. And of course, we're always prone to look for faces. Put limitations on yourself. Limit yourself to like one lens or one subject or one element. The photos on this and the next slide are ones that I took with that Spark 2.0 and the Sweet 50. I had like 2 hours in Chicago Botanic Garden, and I was tired of lugging around all my stuff from the days before. So I thought, I'm literally going to leave everything in the car except for my camera and this one lens. And I made myself it slowed me down, and it made me look at everything really intentionally and really be looking for what's interesting beyond the obvious here. So these are all like water shots in some of the fountains and little areas that they have. And then these two bookmark ones are water. And then these were of these, I can't remember what these plants are. If somebody knows, you can add it in the chat. But it was a really valuable, like often limiting in some way expands, if that makes sense, because it makes you go past that obvious. You can't just go for the low-hanging fruit. And then finally, drawing. And this gets into like creativity cross-training. Put down the camera and get out a sketch pad. If you've not encountered drawing on the right side of the brain, I highly recommend it. This particular exercise that I've got there on the left really changed the way I was able to see. What she does is she challenges you to take this Picasso sketch of Stravinsky and draw it upside down. And what that does is it helps you to release the label. You're not looking at it as this is his head, these are his glasses, these are his arms and his hands in the chair. You're seeing lines, and you're seeing the relationship to the lines. And that's a great way to just, shift your thinking. And so that's what I have for you. A whole bunch of stuff. I wanted to say thank you. Please do join with me on Instagram. Check out my website if you want to see more images. I'm excited to be launching a YouTube channel in early 2024. This is part of made possible by Nick Stover and one of his Inspired Creator Grants. It's taking me a little longer than I wanted to get it going, but I'm going to be launching it. It's called Pixels. And the idea is exploring the heart and art of photography. And I'm hoping to be doing a lot of interviews with people to really kind of delve into their motivations and inspiration and pass that along to you. So if you are interested in having getting the announcement of when that channel launches, I encourage you to leave your email in the chat. It will not add you to an email list per se. It's just so you can get the announcement. And when you get that announcement, you'll have an option to opt in if you want more emails. But this would just be a one-time, shout out to say, hey, it's ready. Please come join us. So please leave your email in the chat if you would like information about that.
Awesome.
I know we probably just got like 2 minutes, but I'm just wondering if anybody's got any questions or comments, anything to add.
Questions. We're going to go through these really quick. You ready? Okay. Not to fire them at you, but I don't want to not throw these at you. Cynthia's question was, do you deal with noise with your tight crops?
Sometimes, yes. Since I upgraded my camera to the R5, it has more pixels. And so I can go in more than I could before because the file is just that much bigger. But really, especially with abstract, here's the good news is that denoise AI in Lightroom is fabulous. It is really fabulous. I exercise caution when I'm using it with people because they can start to look plastic if you're not careful. But in abstracts, crank that sucker up to 100, right? Because it almost, it doesn't matter. So that's my workaround with that.
Okay. Debbie's question was, the tree photos are beautiful. I don't know if you'll remember which ones. Is there texture on them? She's assuming not, but it looks like that maybe that's what made them look dimensional. Do you remember?
The trees.
Yeah, I'm
So
not sure which one she's referring to. Maybe this one.
is it this one? Yeah, no, there's no texture. It's the ICM. So what I did was I took one still, and then I took one ICM where, and here's a trick for you. If you're going to do a vertical or a horizontal and a vertical ICM, if you're going to swipe side and swipe up and down, and you're trying to get something that is lined up, swipe side first, because then you've got the thing that you can swipe up and you can get it aligned. Okay. But that's what I did with this. So I did a still, I swiped probably left, and then I did up and down, and it created that papery texture. Yeah.
Okay. Cheryl's question was, I've never done an inversion. Is there something somewhere that explains how to do that?
I really recommend, the way I learned how to use Photoshop was one tool at a time. So in terms of like learning inversion, I went to YouTube. I said, how to invert a photo on Photoshop, and I found a little tutorial. So you can go into, if you use Photoshop at all, it's in the adjustments, and it's really it's a simple thing where it's one of the options that's around, the color bounce and balance and contrast and saturation, all of that. There's one that's just labeled invert. And so you can invert it. And if it's black and white, obviously it just inverts the black and white. If it's in color, then it inverts it to the whatever the opposite on the color wheel, getting into all the color theory stuff. And so I would recommend, if you're, depending on your comfort level with Photoshop, either, check it out on YouTube or get in there and go to that adjustments and into that inversion.
We're down to two more quick questions. Photo Midwest, what is that?
Oh, yeah. So Photo Midwest is, it's based in Madison, Wisconsin. So if anybody's a Wisconsinite, it's in your backyard. But it's basically a network of photographers that are in the Midwest, and they do both in-house and virtual exhibits. They have monthly and regular webinars. They have special interest groups. So it's like all levels of photographers, and a lot that are both learning and professional. And so it's just another network to get some really good educational opportunities and some networking and whatnot. And along those lines, I also encourage you, if you're not already, to join the Nature Photographers Network, NPN, because that's another great place to meet people and to see lots of diverse photography.
Great. Okay, I like this question. And thank you for asking it, Cynthia. How are abstract photographs judged in a competition?
Fortunately, there's a category usually for abstract. And so my approach is always, if I'm thinking about entering a competition, first I just make sure like the entry fees aren't exorbitant, that they are actually offering prizes, not because I think I'm going to win a prize, but because it's showing that they're not just they're turning back the fees, and awarding artists and honoring their visibility. But I go back into the categories that I'm thinking of entering, and abstract is almost always one of them. And I just look at past winners. And of course, the judges change every time, but it just gives you some sense of how far you can go, I guess, and where yours might fit in. So that's the best advice I can give, is like look for ones that have a discrete abstract category.
That's a great explanation. I'm going to ask you to take down your screen so I can properly thank you for spending.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you for spending your Wednesday night with us and sharing what you know. And there's so much there. There's just I'm going to be greedy and ask you to come back next year. So there's that.
You got it. You got it.
Don't block me.
Yeah. Oh no, never.
Beth, this was wonderful. So thank you for giving us your time, because I know you've got a busy schedule, and we've talked about this. It's been crazy, and it's only going to get crazy. But thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to give it to us and share some wonderful stuff. All right,
You're welcome.
y'all, we kept bringing up, Beth was here and she did a presentation for us. The easy way to find that is the YouTube channel. Look for session 137. I've numbered all of them. And that was called Experience Photography Freedom with ICM. Next week, Canon legend Daryl Gouline will join us to present Capturing Those Special Moments in Nature Photography. So until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.